All right, here is the content for our Bible study, which is going to be focused on Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to Genesis chapter 3, verses 18. First of all, looking at um, the account of the famine and uh, the issue with Sarai, found in Genesis chapter 12, verse 10 to 13, verse 4. This narrative intentionally prefigures the later deliverance of Joseph and uh, Egypt, the Israelites out of Egypt in the Exodus. Both take place because there is a famine in the land. This famine threatens the seed of the promise, that is, Abraham and his descendants. In those days, there was no safety net, and a famine was a life threatening situation for God's people. And so their future is threatened by this famine. And so they head to Egypt. In both of these cases, there is also plagues on Pharaoh and his family. Uh, and the outcome is once again the same, which involves the eventual blessing of the children of Abraham by the Pharaoh. So let's look at this more particularly. When we look at the story, there are actually two threats to the future of God's people. The first is the famine in the land, that in order to show how severe it was, it is mentioned twice. The second threat was just as serious, and it involved the possibility of Sarai being taken by Pharaoh for his wife. Uh, Abram had said, because he was afraid of the Egyptians, that Sarai was his sister. That was partially true, as he was a half sister in a very extreme way, but it wasn't the whole truth. And so um, the Lord, despite Abram's foolishness, still blesses him, and he blesses them in multiplying his flocks and herds, but also in protecting his wife by sending plagues on Pharaoh and causing him to understand that it's because he had taken Sarah to be his wife. And so that we see here that God blesses Abram in spite of his foolishness. Abram will actually repeat this error later in his life, and so will his son. And we'll look at that in later chapters in Genesis. The um, the second part of Genesis chapter 13 is an example of another threat. This time it's not to the seed of Abraham, but it's to the land itself. And Abram and Lot have both become wealthy and prosperous, and because of that, they can't dwell together. There's not enough land for the two men and their herds and flocks to live in close proximity. And at the same time, he also notes, we're also told in the narrative that the Canaanites and the Perizzites were also in the land at that time. So, really, there's the threat of Lot. Abram had a responsibility to Lot because he was his nephew, and so would have been had an obligation to him. But he was also facing the Canaanites and Perizzites, who also lived in the land at that time. So there's three different things going on at once here. Um, but to end the fighting between Abram and his nephew, he said to Lot, "You go, you choose where you want to go, and I'll go the other way." And so Lot uh, chooses the best land, which um, is to the east. And as we've talked about in other times in this Bible study, usually when you hear of people going to the east, it's not a good sign. Adam and Eve were forced east of Eden. Cain went east of Eden. And when the Tower of Babel came, it was people who were traveling eastward and discovered the plains. So this is a hint that Lot is going to be facing some challenges, and this is of course a very real threat, though, to the promised land, because now Abram has given Lot the best part of the promised land. Still, not only is he going east, but we hear several times, I think 3 times it's mentioned, that Sodom is where Lot is headed, and that will prove to be very fateful later on, and we'll look at that in coming weeks. In contrast to this, Abram is promised all the land as far as he can see, including the land of the east that Lot took for himself. Again, how that plays out will be seen in the following chapters. But once again, we see in response to this, Abraham building an altar to the Lord and worshiping God. So that is a reoccurring theme. And in this these 2 different accounts, we see how God ensures the continuation of the seed, the fulfillment of the promises he's made to Abraham, and this despite human decisions and potential lack of judgment. God's plan for this people still comes about. And the fact that some of the major parts of Exodus are being prefigured here is also significant. And it's a reminder that the God who acted in the past uh, is going to be active in the present. And we see this cycle throughout Scripture, in fact. So that's just a brief introduction to the content that we're going to be looking at Thursday night. So hopefully we'll see many of you there.